Assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings be upon you. I hope you have been well. In Islam, we have the most beautiful example of the standards of justice we should have in this world, right? It comes from verse 4, 135 in the Quran, and it says, O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives. Whether one is rich or poor, God is more worthy of both, so follow not personal inclination, lest you not be just. And if you distort your testimony or refuse to give it, then indeed God is ever of what you do aware. And that is the Sahih International translation of that verse. So for a while, I've been thinking about white privilege and how to exemplify its existence, because shockingly, there are still people who deny it, don't believe it exists, even though the evidence is pretty stacked at this point that there is a privilege going on that certain people in our society, namely white males, have that all the rest of us don't. So we could even call it white male privilege, because that's what I'm going to be dealing with today. But in my journey as a hijabi, I have acutely felt that I'm missing some privilege that I had before. And that's a gray area for me. I don't know to call it white privilege or American white girl privilege, or, the label isn't as important as the difference in treatment that I've received. Anyway, and then the case of Kyle Rittenhouse popped into the media, and I watched it just enthralled and amazed at this prime example of white privilege in action, from the beginning event that spurred it, which was Jacob Blake's shooting, all the way up until Mr. Rittenhouse's trial. So let's get into that and dissect it to really expose white privilege in America. In order to do so, we have to go back to August 23rd, 2020, when officers were called out to the residence of Jacob Blake's girlfriend, or baby mama at the time. They had been called by his baby's mama because he was attempting to take the rental car that was in her name, and she didn't want him to do that. He had placed his 8-year-old son and a few other children in the back of the car in order to take them away from the scene, because his baby mama was getting into drama with the neighbor, and he didn't want that happening on the birthday, and he didn't want to deal with it. Anyway, so he was trying to leave the drama, and police officers were called and showed up in the middle of that. Now, on the way, they had been told, by the way, Jacob Blake also has warrants for arrest in this case, and this case. Warrants don't equal guilty, right? Let's keep that one in mind. So the police officers have this in the back of their mind too, as they're trying to interact with Jacob Blake. Now, in the video that went viral, you see Jacob Blake getting up from the ground, and we later learned that he had been tased and he had taken out the barbs from his skin. And in that process, a pocket knife had dropped from his pocket. So when he gets up from being tased, a little bit woozy and a little bit confused, he picks up that pocket knife and then is walking away from officers around to the driver's side of the car. And in the video, you can hear them screaming at him, drop the knife, drop the knife. So at that point, he was armed. We have to be factual and true in our dissecting of these events, or it will be meaningless and for naught. But clearly in the video, he's not brandishing the weapon towards anybody in particular, and especially not towards the police officers, because he's just trying to get into his car, right? And in order to prevent him from getting in his car, one officer, Rustin Shesky, pulls him by the shirt, and then the shocking part comes where he shoots him close range 7 times in the back, resulting in Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old father of 7, being paralyzed for the rest of his life. Now, was Jacob Blake complying with officers' orders? No, clearly not, okay? Was Jacob Blake armed? He himself admitted he had picked up a pocket knife, so Technically, that would make him armed, right? Was he a threat to this police officer's life from what we see in the video and from his own testimony? No. Did he deserve to be shot 7 times because he wasn't listening to police officers? No. And the fact that Rustin Shesky could pull him by the shirt means they were close enough that he also could have punched him or kicked him or even shot him in the leg or somewhere else and incapacitated him with 1 bullet, never mind 7. What we see in the video is a very different story. And I liken it to when your child is not listening for like ever, and then you just lose it and in a fit of rage do something that you regret later. And the fact that we can't honestly evaluate that video and say, look, you didn't need to shoot the guy 7 times in the back, and there are charges that we can bring against you, such as excessive use of force, is just mind-boggling to me. So here, white privilege saved Rustin Shesky even from getting any charges brought against him, even though the viral video shows that he didn't have to shoot him 7 times in the back, and pretty much that was a rage, punitive shooting. Rustin Shesky took away Jacob Blake's right to trial. He was guilty in Rustin's mind before even getting a chance to speak about his case, right? And then, furthermore, Jacob Blake was denied justice because Rustin Shesky was not brought up on any charges. 0 charges for rage shooting Jacob Blake. Clearly, this caused some tension in the community between the police and the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, this incident came on the heels of George Floyd, and that was also fresh in Jacob Blake's mind when he was interacting with the police. So you have to understand how these things play on each other as well, and the kind of mind frame people form. So anyways, as a result, on August 23rd and 24th, there were peaceful protests by the Black Lives Matter movement. And let me pause here and just explain, because some people take offense to this name, Black Lives Matter, and you really shouldn't, because all they're trying to point out is that Black Lives Matter too, right? Because historically, they haven't, guys. In this country, we have to be honest. Only 150 years ago, in the case of Dred Scott versus Sanford, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Black people were not American citizens and could not sue in courts of law, okay? Our justice system that to this day metes out justice to different people, 150 years ago wouldn't even hear the case of a Black man or a Black woman or a colored person, right? Didn't matter. If you weren't white, you couldn't sue in court. And we know all the problems that happened along the way with segregation and not being able to eat in the same restaurants and go to the same schools and marry people of other races. We know this history, okay? This is American history. So all Black Lives Matter is trying to do is say, hey, Black Lives Matter too. They're not saying your life doesn't matter. The point is, your life has always mattered, right? Blue lives matter, clearly. They were concerned about Rustin Shesky's life and how charges brought against him would affect the rest of his life. They were not concerned about the quality of life that Jacob Blake now has because he's paralyzed from the inappropriate actions of Rustin Shesky on that day. And then these events spurred the Black Lives Matter movement to form peaceful protests, by the way. And there is some controversy who is looting and rioting at night in Kenosha, Wisconsin on the 23rd and the 24th. By the 25th, a group of white males primarily get it in their heads that they need to form a civilian guard to protect local businesses from further looting and rioting. Let's be clear here. I don't think looting and rioting is, I don't think breaking the law because law was broken fixes anything, okay? So the fact that Jacob Blake did not experience justice does not give anyone the right to mete out injustice to other people, especially local businesses that had nothing to do with it, right? But I can understand how this is frustration being realized, okay? I can empathize with that part, but it's still wrong to do. But again, we can't break the law because other people broke the law. So this white civilian guard who decides to arm themselves, Kyle Rittenhouse being one of them, and show up to Kenosha, breaking the law because they had set a curfew of 8 p.m. on August 25th, and all of those white militiamen who were out there, along with the protesters, were breaking the law, okay, does not fix it. Anyway, so on August 25th, Kyle Rittenhouse, 17 years old. Let's just wow, 17, right? When I was 17, I definitely shouldn't have had access to a weapon like what Kyle Rittenhouse had. We're not talking about a little pistol here. He had a semi-automatic weapon that did serious damage to one of the victim's biceps. If you look at those videos and those exhibits. Oof. So anyway, a 17-year-old white boy. Here comes white privilege at its finest. First, he is allowed to walk around the streets after curfew in violation of the law with a semi-automatic weapon in front of adult police officers and a bunch of other adults. Not one adult said to this little guy, hey, you're kind of young, you should probably go home, or you should put that weapon down. Because we don't have reports of other people being shot and killed. The only person who shot and killed anybody was the young, inexperienced guy who shouldn't have been there in the first place. But Kyle Rittenhouse felt entitled to walk around with this gun and guard businesses and help people. Now, in all honesty, viewing his witness testimony and what everybody else had to say, I don't think Kyle Rittenhouse went there to kill people. I do believe it was an unfortunate accident, but to call it self-defense when you show up in violation of the law is pushing things, right? It's not like these protesters went to Kyle Rittenhouse's house, pulled him out, and then he shot them. He was in a situation that was illegal in the first place. So that makes him a combatant automatically. And the same is for the protesters who got shot. We have to be equal in our treatment. They were all breaking the law at this point. So my initial point of breaking the law because laws were broken, it just spirals. You see how it spirals here? First, Jacob Blake allegedly broke laws, right? And then in response, the officer breaks the law. And then in response, citizens break the law. And then in response to that, other citizens decide they can take the law into their own hands and also break the law. And from it, we just have a line of heartache and injustice, right? So anyways, the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse was allowed to walk around that night and wasn't questioned, arrested, or had his weapon confiscated from him is white privilege, guys. If Jacob Blake had showed up to that scene, we would have shot and asked questions later, right? Even though Kyle Rittenhouse, being a 17-year-old young white male with a semi-automatic weapon, fits the profile of the mass shooters in the United States of America to this date. Think about that one. But somehow police did not see Kyle as a threat. They saw a boy walking towards them with a semi-automatic weapon, and still, he was not a threat. Jacob Blake was walking away with a pocket knife, and he was seen as a threat. What's at play here? Anyway, so an unfortunate series of events unfolded, and I really do feel bad that Kyle put himself in this situation and that adults didn't step in to stop him from doing so. Because his inexperience in his youth definitely played a role in instigating this event, okay? The first shooting, from all accounts and from the footage, looks like, yeah, he was in fear. The victim lunging at him was going to give him a beating, right? At the very least. And at worst, he feared for his life. So he shot him 4 times. Now you have to look at it from the protesters' perspective. It's chaos. It's nighttime. And all they see is a young white boy with a semi-automatic weapon killing a protester. And then they see him run away from the scene. So they believe he is going to shoot more people. And this is actually the most logical thing to think, given, again, the profile of mass shooters in America. This catches wind in the protesters' crowd, and the second victim sees Kyle Rittenhouse whizzing past him with his gun and looking kind of crazy, and then he hears that this is the guy who just shot somebody. So, springing into action to prevent further violence, he takes a skateboard and tries to, or successfully, I guess, hits Kyle and is trying to disarm him so he can't kill anybody else. Because in the second victim's mind, this could be a potential mass shooter. Logical, right? Anyway, Kyle doesn't want to be disarmed, is probably genuinely in fear for his life, unless he's a psychopath or a sociopath and has us all tricked, which, could happen. But giving him the benefit of the doubt, he shoots this second guy who's trying to disarm him, and then the third, who had a pistol in his hand, he shot actually only the arm of this man with a pistol. So in these actions, when you put them all together, you see a scared little boy with inexperience, and he is trying to get towards the police, because we have the footage of him with his hands up walking towards police because he's done something wrong. He's killed 2 people and wounded a third. He knows that. He is trying to exact justice on himself. He is trying to do the right thing, okay? So I don't really believe it was his intention to skip town, but the police didn't recognize that he was the one who had shot people, and so he's told to get off the street, and he goes home. He's not arrested till the next day, okay? That is white privilege. Somebody actually committing crimes on camera and being able to walk home and be arrested the next day. That's white privilege right there. The fact that he was able to go to trial is white privilege. The fact that we're talking about his future, we're concerned, if he doesn't get acquitted from all these charges, this poor little white boy, his whole future is blown. He's only 18 years old. Which I agree with you. He's only 18 years old. What in the world was he doing with a semi-automatic weapon at a protest? Breaking curfew. We can't hold him accountable for any of that. So amongst the charges that were dropped against Kyle and he was acquitted from were first-degree recklessly endangering safety, use of a dangerous weapon, possession of a dangerous weapon by a person under 18, and failure to comply with an emergency order from state or local government. Not one of these, because these are the non-controversial ones in my mind. Like, we should have definitely charged this kid with something, because otherwise you're sending out the message that, yeah, vigilante justice is fine. You could claim self-defense when you put yourself in the middle of a chaotic situation and accidentally kill people, and nothing will happen to you. And it just is so amazing to see people speaking about how clearly it was self-defense. Well, again, he went to the situation. He went looking for a fight, and got into 2 or 3, right? And sadly, it ended in the loss of life for 2 people. That's a hole in other people's worlds. 2 people are missing. And there was no justice given. Kyle was acquitted completely. That's white privilege right there. Innocent until proven guilty. And the standard is so high to prove guilty when the defendant is someone like Kyle Rittenhouse. On the other hand, had it been someone like, I don't know, Ahmed or Jacob Blake or anyone else, any other minority that we had, or one of those Mexican criminals that are coming across the border, it would have been a completely different story. There would be no acquittal. There might not even be a trial. That person would not have been allowed to walk around the way Kyle was allowed, okay? Without being arrested or killed. It just wouldn't have happened, especially not on that night. This is a great miscarriage of justice, and I feel for the kid because he is young, and I do believe he believed he was acting in self-defense. But we can't completely wash his hands clean from this. 2 people are dead, 1 person's wounded, and he did break the law in multiple counts, like provable multiple counts, and yet he was acquitted. Now, the murder charges that were brought against him, I agree. These are, there's a higher standard and it would be difficult to prove. But we have involuntary manslaughter. We have laws which could have, or charges which could have been brought that should have stuck in this case. And so that's white privilege right there. Kyle gets to move on with his life. So to recap, white privilege is the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse walked around in public with a semi-automatic weapon in front of police without getting at the very least arrested and at the worst shot. The fact that Kyle Rittenhouse then shot and killed 2 people and then injured another and was not shot or arrested right away is also white privilege. The fact that Kyle Rittenhouse is alive and well and at trial where a sympathetic judge is presiding is white privilege. The fact that Kyle Rittenhouse was not charged with anything and acquitted of all charges, even the ones that he was clearly guilty of, is white privilege. And if none of that rings true for you, I don't think there is going to be a case that could convince you otherwise. From my own personal account, after I started wearing hijab, I had some incidents that made me acutely feel, white privilege is a thing, or there is a privilege here that I had when I didn't wear hijab, or something I was afforded that I'm not afforded anymore for some reason, in some cases. And I'm not saying it's everybody, but it is a problem. Even with the police themselves, if a hijabi had been walking around with a semi-automatic weapon in the same case, would she have survived that? Nah, I'm pretty sure they would have shot and asked questions later, because we're labeled as terrorists, and Black people are labeled as criminal thugs, and Mexicans are labeled as criminal thugs, and these are the narratives we allow. But when a mass shooting happens with the exact profile of Kyle Rittenhouse, a young white boy, we don't label it as a systemic problem for white males. For some reason, it doesn't stick, right? And that reason is because we don't push that narrative. So all of these things play into how our justice system works and how we work as a society. I'm going to leave you with the wise words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In his last speech, it was so important for him to stress the equality of human beings, regardless of color or creed, that he said, "All humans are descended from Adam and Eve. There is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, or of a non-Arab over an Arab, and no superiority of a white person over a black person, or of a black person over a white person, except on the basis of personal piety and righteousness." This should be our standard for equality here. This is allegedly what America stands for. So until we see the law being meted out evenly and the treatment evening out, we should always talk about and raise our concerns with what is happening in the society around us. It's actually our obligation to do so. Always wishing you what is better. Assalamu alaikum.